Hello everyone, welcome to Star Psych, and today I want to talk about the INTJ death stare, or this look that is commonly associated with the INTJ personality type. It's a look that is often noted for being kind of sharp, or as if it's looking right through you, detached. And I want to talk about what on a cognitive function level causes the INTJ to kind of have this death stare, and how it compares to even some other types, or even like the INFJ or ISFJ and ISTJ. Let's get into it. The first thing to note about INTJs is that they are an introverted perceiving dominant type. So they have introverted intuition as their first function, and introverted intuition is an introverted perceiving function. What this means is that they're going to be looking inside of themselves, essentially, whenever they are processing new information. They tend to stay away from perceiving things in the outer world unless they absolutely have to, or they're kind of dragged out of their inner self. So you're going to find that a lot of the time when an INTJ is presented with new information or they need to process something, they kind of go inside their head for a minute. They go inside their mind and they kind of just try to process this, essentially. And what this looks like is it looks like the INTJ is essentially detaching from the situation because they're no longer within the present moment. They're in either a daydream-like state or they're thinking about something. It can be different for everyone, but essentially they're just within their own head and they're not in a present state of mind. Now, introverted intuition differs from introverted sensing as a function because introverted intuition, I would say, is the most abstract focused of all the functions, even as an introverted perceiving function, because it does not rely on sensory information for it to kind of be functioning. It's more healthily inspired by outer sensory information, but unlike introverted sensing that is a direct impression of something in the sensory realm, intuition is not. And therefore, you could find that the introverted intuitives in particular can become exceptionally detached and have this very detached look. ISTJs and ISFJs kind of have this detached look, but it's still like they're kind of there. They're present just a little bit. You don't have to snap them out of it. And that's going to be the difference between them and an INTJ or an INFJ. You have to snap an INTJ or INFJ back into reality. And you'll notice this when you're having conversations with them. You'll be talking to them and all of a sudden they'll float off mid-sentence or they'll float off mid-conversation with you. And then you'll have to be like, hey, you there? You listening? And it may even seem rude to some people. But what this is that introverted intuition just latched on to something that someone said, and it brought them into their own mind to process what was said or try to find some sort of conclusion from the information that was given to them. In my opinion, the death stare of the INTJ doesn't come from introverted intuition itself, but instead from extroverted thinking. And to understand why I think of it this way, ask yourself, why don't we associate the death stare with the INFJ personality type? Well, it's because the INTJ has extroverted thinking to support their introverted intuition, while the INFJ has extroverted feeling. INTJs, when they are forced out of their introverted intuition thought process, kind of re-engage with the world using extroverted thinking. So what you're catching is a very swift and direct transition from introverted intuition to extroverted thinking, and you're seeing them focus their gaze on you in a sharp and logical way. They're not approaching you with feelings like you might see with the INFJ, who when they snap back to reality, their looks tend to be slightly more warm, although still detached. INFJs are going to have a more so extroverted feeling approach to conversations when they are brought into the extroverted world because extroverted feeling is their secondary function. With the INTJ, when they are snapped out of introverted intuition, they are brought into extroverted thinking, and that's how they're going to be kind of engaging with the person that they're discussing with, and that's going to cause that very sharp and immediate stare when you detach them from introverted intuition. Well, then you might ask the question, well, how come ENTJs or ESTJs don't have death stares? And my response to that would be, they do. It's just kind of their normal face usually, especially if there's someone who's really, competency focused or there's someone who's very competitive. If you go and talk to the ENTJs and ESTJs of the world who are really into their extroverted thinking, they have very sharp and rigid looks, but they maintain those looks. And it becomes less of a death stare because there's not as much transition between the introverted intuition and extroverted thinking, and the look isn't going to be as drastic when they do switch. When an ENTJ switches into introverted intuition, it's different and almost weird for the outside viewer because they're going within themselves, and you see them detach, and you go, I wonder what they're thinking. They look really detached and kind of eccentric or weird right now. Whereas with the INTJ, they're eccentric and detached and weird most of the time, and then they snap into that extroverted thinking glare very sharply when they're brought out of introverted intuition. And that's what causes people to have that perception that this is kind of their look, that the INTJs have this death stare, because it's something that's not as reformed or natural for them as compared to the extroverted thinking dominant types. I hope that helped you understand the INTJ death stare and why they kind of have this weird and very focused and sharp look when they're talking to people or they're brought out of their introverted intuition. A lot of the times, the INTJ isn't actually going to be very upset, annoyed, or angry because they're very, very used to being brought out of their introverted intuition. As an introverted intuitive Dom, you'll find that they very much get caught into these cycles of thinking about things and then being forced out of them. One of my close friends is an ENTJ, and he tells me all the time, like, hey, I have to snap you back into reality when we're having conversations. Why do you always do this? Why do you always kind of detach or float away when we're talking? And for me, it's just because that's what happens when my mind catches on to something. Once I get into the process of starting to process information, I follow down that road, and it can become very easy for me to get lost in that thought process and lose the conversation that I was within. And sometimes I have to be brought back into it. And I think that that's actually pretty normal for a lot of the introverted intuitive Doms. You're just going to see that when you talk to an INTJ, they're going to have that sharp extroverted thinking response or look when they come out of introverted intuition, while when you look at INFJs, you're going to see the much warmer on average extroverted feeling. Other than that, I would like to remind people that I do have personality typing sessions available at my website, astrosec.com, if you're interested in working with me to find out what your personality type is and what that means for you. This has been Asura from Astrosec. Have a good one.